Rancher lived alone for years until 7 beautiful Apache women asked to stay the night. A rancher lived alone for years until 7 women cloaked in silence and rain rode into his life. But what Silas Whitmore saw in their eyes that storm-ripped evening wasn't fear. It was something far more dangerous, something that mirrored his own reflection when he dared to look in the mirror. The wind howled like a wounded coyote across the bone-dry plains of eastern New Mexico, where the land was more dust than memory. It slammed against the ranch house's weathered boards, groaning like ghosts, begging to come inside. Silas stood still as stone at the kitchen window, coffee gone cold in his calloused hand. His knuckles chipped and scarred from years of fencing, branding, and rebuilding things too broken to fix clutched the tin cup like it was a weapon. The storm outside swallowed what little daylight remained, leaving only shadows and the slow tick of the clock above the hearth. For 8 years, no soul had crossed his threshold without invitation. And for 8 years, he had welcomed no one. Then came the sound horses, hooves slicing through mud and rain. 7 of them, maybe more. He blinked through the glass as sheets of water blurred the world. But the silhouettes were clear, 7 figures on horseback, cloaked in black like mourners riding from a funeral. But they weren't mourning. They were moving too tight, too precise. Not wanderers, not victims, soldiers. If you're already feeling the tension, comment 1 below to show you love cowboy love stories on Wild West Love. Let's ride together. Silas set down his cup with the slow deliberation of a man who'd seen too many things end badly. His fingers twitched toward the Winchester hanging above the stone hearth, then stopped. His gut wasn't screaming bandits, but it was growling something just as cold. The lead rider was already dismounting. Even through the storm, she stood out like blood on snow, auburn hair drenched and clinging to her high cheekbones. A traveling dress once fine, now torn at the hem, mud splashed up to her knees. She approached his door with the confidence of a woman used to commanding rooms full of Menand, leaving them empty. The other 6 stayed mounted, their wide-brimmed hats low, their forms unreadable in the storm. But Silas noted every detail: straight backs, calm hands on reins, eyes scanning, not pleading. These weren't helpless widows. They were something else. The auburn-haired woman stepped closer, voice cutting through the wind like a blade. "Mister, please, we need shelter for the night." And Silas didn't answer right away. He studied them through the glass. 7 women traveling alone in country that'd kill a man by midnight. And their horses strong, well-fed, tacked in expensive leather. That kind of horse don't belong to beggars. He thought of his father's old words. A man's character is measured by how he treats those who can do nothing for him. But these women, they didn't look like they couldn't do nothing. They looked like they'd done plenty. The wind banged a shutter loose. Silas flinched. 8 years of silence had carved him into something hard, something hollow. But his bones hadn't forgotten justice or danger. He opened the door. The storm rushed in, wrapping cold fingers around his neck and shoulders. The woman stepped inside like she belonged there, rain dripping from her lashes, her green eyes sharp and empty. "Thank you," she said simply, then added, "I'm Magnolia Voss. These are my traveling companions." The pause between traveling and companions was just long enough to raise 1,000 questions. The other 6 began dismounting. Without asking, they led their horses to the barn like they'd done it 100 times before. Silas watched the formation, the order, the way they moved, like pieces on a chessboard. "Where you headed?" he asked. Voice low, hand never straying far from his belt. "California," Magnolia replied smoothly. Her coat came off, revealing a bodice far too fine for ranch trails. "We're all recently widowed. Thought we'd travel together. Safety in numbers." Silas grunted. His eyes narrowed. "Widows don't ride like cavalry. Widows don't carry knives hidden in corset seams. And widows sure as hell don't give off the scent of gunpowder and regret. The last woman to enter the house moved with less ease than the rest. She was smaller, darker Apache by the look of her, long black braids soaked and clinging to her back. She said nothing, but her eyes locked with Silas's for a heartbeat too long. They weren't pleading. They weren't afraid. They were recognizing. Something inside Silas stirred like an ember catching wind. He looked away too fast. "You got names?" he muttered, pouring coffee into tin mugs. "Lena, Clara, Pearl, Faye, Rose, and the quiet one there, that's Ayanna." The name rolled through him like thunder. Ayanna. It sounded like water moving under ice. The Apache girl stepped forward, still silent. Her cheeks were flushed with cold, or maybe pride. A scar marked her jawline, clean and straight. Not from accident, from punishment. Silas didn't ask. Instead, he handed her a mug. Their fingers touched, just barely, and yet lightning cracked outside. But it wasn't as sharp as what passed between their skin. Ayanna flinched first. Or maybe it was him. Her hand trembled just enough to make the coffee slosh. But she didn't break the gaze. Silas cleared his throat, looked away. "Storm's not dying soon," he said, voice rougher than he meant. "Neither are we," Magnolia replied, settling near the hearth like she owned it. The others spread out, never with backs turned, never too far from weapons. Silas leaned against the doorway, watching them. 7 women in his home, a fire crackling behind them, a past clawing at his throat. He looked at Ayanna again, and for the first time in years, he felt something flicker. Not trust, not even warmth, but the raw bones of both. She didn't smile, she didn't speak, but her eyes told stories. Stories of sisters taken, of fathers silenced, of horses galloping through the night with ropes dragging behind. Silas's chest tightened. He had seen that look once before, on a girl he couldn't save. A girl with eyes just like Ayanna's Diana's. And for the first time since the war, Silas Whitmore whispered to himself, "Maybe this storm didn't come to break me. Maybe it came to remind me who I used to be." The wind hadn't let up. It scratched at the windows like claws, blew ashes from the fireplace, and made the lantern flames flicker with nervous breath. Inside the cabin, the tension had settled heavier than the snow outside. The kind of tension that didn't come from weather, but from truth held too long. Silas Whitmore leaned against the edge of the hearth, arms crossed, watching the women with the same suspicion that had kept him alive for 53 winters. Magnolia sat at the table now, cleaning her revolver like it was a ritual. The others were scattered. Pearl checking the door locks, Faye lounging on the couch with a derringer tucked under her thigh, Lena pacing like a woman being haunted by her own conscience. And Ayanna, she was by the window, face lit only by lightning flashes. Her dark braid rested down the front of her shoulder, a loose strand stuck to her cheek. She hadn't said a word since she stepped foot into his house. But Silas hadn't stopped hearing her silence. It spoke louder than Magnolia's confidence, louder than Pearl's fake sweetness. That silence reminded him of himself. "Why don't y'all tell me what you're really doing here?" he said finally, voice quiet but heavy. "And don't give me that California widow story. I've seen corpses with more truth in their eyes." Magnolia didn't flinch. She simply met his gaze, gun still in her hand. "You want the truth?" "I want what you've been hiding since you walked in." Lena stopped pacing. Her breath hitched just once, but Silas caught it. Her eyes flicked toward Ayanna, then to Magnolia. No one said anything. For one long second, it felt like even the wind stopped to listen. Then Lena broke. Her voice was hoarse and trembling. We didn't rob a bank, Silas. Everyone turned. We didn't rob for gold. Not for ourselves. That bank, her lip quivered. That bank's a front. A trading post for women. Girls. Stolen. Sold like cattle. Silas's stomach twisted. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. Magnolia stood, slow and calm. Her green eyes locked on his. We've been tracking them for months. From Abilene to Silver Creek. That bank holds the money used to pay for girls taken from reservations, orphanages, border towns. The man who runs it is the same man who took Ayana's sister. The room went deathly still. Silas turned toward Ayana. She hadn't moved, still staring out the window. But her hand, resting on the windowsill, had tightened into a fist. "Tell him," Magnolia said gently. "He deserves to know." Ayana didn't look back, but her voice finally came. Soft, low, but each word cut deeper than any knife. Her name was Taya. She blinked, and a tear rolled down her cheek like a drop of rain clinging to a dying leaf. She was 14, quiet, loved carving birds out of wood. One day she went to fetch water. She never came back. Silas's throat went dry. "We searched for weeks," Ayana continued, her voice still calm. Too calm. "Found the horse, found the bucket, found blood on the sand. Then we heard rumors of a man with brands on his men's wrists, a man who deals in girls. Cormac Doolan." Silas muttered. Ayana turned then, slowly. Their eyes met across the room. Her voice didn't break, but his heart did. "He sold her to a man in Missouri. We got there too late." She'd already, her lips trembled, but she refused to cry. "Been used and killed." Lightning crashed. Faye swore under her breath. Pearl turned away, biting her knuckle. But Silas didn't move, didn't speak. He just stared at Ayana, like she was the final piece in a puzzle he'd buried for years. "You know his name?" she said softly. "How?" Silas didn't answer at first. Then, slowly, he walked to the mantel, pulled the floorboard loose again, and from beneath it, he drew a small leather folder. Inside, maps, names, photos, ledgers. "I've been tracking Doolan's network since before you were born," he said. 8 years ago, I lost a girl I was supposed to protect. She was 12, foster kid, sold from a church orphanage. Case went cold. Sheriff looked the other way. Judges shut their mouths. So I quit, disappeared, kept watching, waiting. He turned to Ayana. "I remember Taya. I saw the report. Your name was in the file. You were, what, 19? Ayana nodded. Her lip trembled. Silas saw it just for a second. The armor cracked. He stepped closer. "I should have found her. I failed her." "So did I," she whispered. Her voice broke. "Number." Silas reached out hesitantly. His hand hovered over hers, then gently wrapped around her trembling fingers. "You're still fighting. That's not failure. That's love." Her breath caught, their eyes locked, and something shifted. In that dim little room, beneath a storm that had outstayed its welcome, the rage they carried began to cool. The pain didn't vanish, but for the first time, it shared a name. Ayana didn't speak. She just leaned her forehead against his chest, her hand still in his. And Silas. He wrapped his arms around her like she might disappear if he let go. The moment was broken by hoofbeats. Loud, fast, coming down the mountain pass like judgment. Magnolia sprang up. "That's them." "How many?" Faye called, already reloading. Pearl peered out the crack in the shutters. "At least 10. All armed." Lena trembled. "Cormac's found us." Silas let go of Ayana gently, walked to the cabinet and pulled out his repeater. "Then we stop hiding. He turned to the women, his voice steady as a storm worn oak. Tonight we make them pay for every girl they ever touched. For Taya, for Rose, for every name we don't know. And in Ayana's eyes, there was no longer just grief. There was fire. The first shot didn't come from outside. It came from within. Faye, crouched near the window with a sawed-off shotgun nestled in her lap, was the first to break the tension. When one of Cormac Doolan's men stepped into her crosshairs, unaware, too bold, too sure of himself, she didn't hesitate. Boom! The blast ripped through the cold night like thunder over dry canyon walls. The man collapsed into the snow, his scream swallowed by the wind. That was the signal. Silas kicked the table over, flipping it sideways for cover. Clara and Pearl scrambled behind the fireplace stones, each woman trained, poised. Hearts thudding but fingers steady, Magnolia rolled to the door and pulled it open just wide enough to throw a Molotov cocktail fashioned from an old oil lamp and a bottle of Silas's homemade corn whiskey. The fireball hit the barn wall and exploded with a roar. Horses screamed. Men shouted. Chaos bloomed like blood on white snow. Positions. Silas barked, his voice that of the lawman he used to be. The quiet man no longer stood in the cabin. This was the ghost of the federal marshal reborn in flame. He stood in the center of the room, repeater rifle in hand, sleeves rolled, teeth gritted. Smoke curled through the cracks of the windows. Glass shattered. A bullet whined past his head and embedded itself into the mantel behind him. "They're flanking east," Lena shouted from the second floor, her eyes barely visible between the broken shutters. "Let them," Magnolia called back. "We've got the high ground." Then the real war began. Men poured from the woods like wolves, 6 on the left, 4 on the right. Most carried pistols. Some had rifles slung across their backs, but all bore the same symbol Silas had seen once before, branded beneath their sleeves, inked into their skin like a curse. The mark of Doolan's trade. A serpent coiled around a crying girl. Silas's gut clenched. He dropped one of the riders clean through the chest as the man tried to climb the fence line. Another fell to Pearl's hidden derringer. 2 shots fired with deadly elegance as she crouched beneath the porch. Rose, still trembling, refused to carry a weapon. But she moved silently between the women, carrying rounds, bandages, filling cups of water from the snowmelt bucket as calmly as a nurse in wartime. "More on the ridge," Faye called. Her face was smudged with ash, but her smile was wild. "Looks like Doolan brought the whole damn hive." Ayana hadn't fired a shot. Not yet. She stood at the rear door, rifle in hand, eyes focused on the tree line, waiting, not for any man, for one man. Silas saw it. The way her breath changed when a dark figure on a black horse crested the rise beyond the barn. Broad shoulders, long black coat. The wind peeled the hat from his head, revealing a face as cruel as it was familiar. Cormac Doolan, alive, smiling, like the devil himself had come to collect. "Ayana." Silas stepped beside her, his voice low and measured. "He's here." She nodded. Not fear, not panic, but readiness. "Don't try to stop me." "Wouldn't dream of it," he replied, but his eyes said otherwise. The rear door exploded inward. 2 of Doolan's men stormed in, wild-eyed and shouting. One tackled Clara. They fell together in a tangle of limbs and gunmetal. Magnolia's knife flashed across the room like lightning, slicing through the attacker's neck before he could fire. Blood sprayed the wooden floor. The second man raised a pistol at Ayana. He never got the chance. Silas dropped him with a single shot. The man's body collapsed at her feet, eyes still open in surprise. Ayana didn't flinch. She turned and stepped outside. Snow whirled around her like ghosts. The air stung her cheeks, wind biting through her coat. Cormac dismounted slowly, like a man not afraid to bleed. "Little Apache," he drawled. "Didn't expect to see you again." Ayana raised her rifle. I expected to see you. Doolan smirked, his eyes green, venomous narrowed. Still playing warrior. Taya screamed your name before she died. Thought you'd like to know. The words hit her like a punch to the chest. Behind her, Silas appeared, rifle raised. Don't. But Ayana held up a hand. This one's mine. Cormac reached for his holster. Ayana shot first. The bullet hit his leg, dropping him to one knee. He howled, fury twisting his face. You bitch. And another shot, this time to the shoulder. He fell back, coughing, bleeding into the snow. The storm swirled harder now, as if the land itself wanted to bury him. She stood over him. Taya didn't scream. Her voice broke only a little. She sang, my people don't give their last breath to fear. We give it to the wind. Cormac spat blood. Kill me then. Go ahead. She looked at Silas. Then at the fire still burning near the barn. No, she said. You're going to live, and you're going to watch as everything you built turns to ash. Silas took a slow breath, then cuffed Doolan's wrists behind his back with a pair of old federal chains that hadn't seen daylight in years. Inside, the last of the attackers had fallen. Clara stood bleeding from her arm, but smiling. Magnolia was crouched beside Rose, murmuring softly, her hand on the girl's shoulder. Pearl sat cross-legged with her back against the door, loading the last of her bullets. The cabin was a mess of splintered wood, shattered glass, blood drying black on the floor. Silas dragged Cormac inside and dropped him near the fireplace. It's over, he said. Number. Ayana stood behind him, rifle lowered. It just began. At dawn, the world was quiet. The snow had stopped. The blood had dried. Cormac Doolan sat bound and broken, muttering curses to a god who wasn't listening. His men, dead or fled. The fire had died down to embers. Smoke rose from the barn damaged, but not destroyed. Silas stood outside the cabin, hat in hand, face to the wind. Ayana joined him, arms folded, silent. She'd be proud of you, he said. I hope so. He turned to her. What now? She met his eyes, her own still fierce, but gentler somehow. We take what's left of that money and build something. A place where no girl sleeps in fear. A place with locks on the inside. Silas nodded. And us? Her answer was a whisper. We'll see. End. But she didn't move away. She leaned her head against his shoulder. And for the first time since he buried his badge, Silas Whitmore closed his eyes and didn't feel alone. The snow had melted in patches, like old memories finally giving way to spring. The mountains no longer growled with thunder. The wind had calmed into a whisper. What once was a battlefield, the yard, the porch, the broken fences, the scorched trail now lay in an uneasy silence, like a house after morning. Silas stood by the barn, sleeves rolled up, one hand gripping a hammer, the other rubbing the scar on his jaw that Ayana had kissed 2 nights ago. He could still feel the press of her lips, not like heat or warmth, but like a question that lingered. Could a man like him be rebuilt? Behind him, inside the main house, the women moved with a rhythm that was no longer rooted in survival. It was something else now. Life, maybe. Hope, perhaps. Lena was teaching Margot to bake cornbread, their laughter soft like quilted fabric. Magnolia was in the back garden with Reyes, planting winter greens in soil still holding the echo of gunfire. And Ayana. She was watching him from the doorway. He knew it, even without turning. Will you keep standing like that? She called out. Or will you come help me paint the window frames? He turned, smiled. Only if you promise not to use that color that looks like old tobacco. Ayana grinned, and something in Silas's chest shifted, like snow falling from a pine branch after holding it too long. They had buried the bodies 2 days ago, Cormac Doolan and the last of his men. buried them with no prayers, no markers, just a thin layer of dirt and the wind to carry their names away. No one cried. No one needed to. I don't want revenge anymore, Ayanna had whispered that night, her fingers threading through Silas's as they sat on the porch. I want peace, and I want to give others what my sister never had a way out. Silas had said nothing, just held her hand, let her words settle like dust on his skin. He knew what she meant. Vengeance was a short fire. It warmed nothing. But love could light a whole town. That morning, they began rebuilding the farmhouse, not just patching up bullet holes or replacing broken planks, but truly rebuilding. They tore down the front porch and extended it, wide enough to fit 3 rocking chairs and a table. Magnolia crafted them a sign from leftover timber. House of the Chosen, because that's what they were now. Not victims, not fugitives, chosen. By fate, by fire, by each other. Reyes found 2 orphaned boys hiding in a woodshed half a mile out, clutching bags of flour like they were gold. One of them had a burn on his left arm. The other didn't speak. They named them Theo and Jin, and just like that, the house wasn't just a home, it was a beginning. One afternoon, after retiling the roof and before the rain came again, Silas walked into the garden to find Ayanna humming over a row of violets. You always hum that same tune, he said. It's not a tune, it's my sister's lullaby. Silas knelt beside her, hands stained with cedar dust. Will you ever tell me her name? Ayanna looked at him, the wind playing in her hair. Her name was Luma. Silas nodded. Then we'll plant a tree for her, right in the center of the yard, where it can grow taller than all of us. She didn't cry, but he saw her blink slower than usual. And then she whispered, "You're the only man who never asked what happened to me before asking what I want to become." He didn't know what to say to that, so he placed his palm over hers like he had in the storm, and that was enough. Weeks passed, then months. The snow left completely, and spring arrived like a shy guest bringing baskets of green and gold. The land forgave the blood that had soaked into it. The trees grew new buds. The chickens returned to laying eggs, and laughter became a common sound again. They bought books for the children, built shelves from pine. Magnolia taught them numbers. Lena taught them how to defend themselves. Reyes started writing letters to neighboring towns, asking if there were other girls, other runaways, other lost souls who needed a place. The replies came in slowly, wrapped in hope and caution. One night, after supper, as they sat by the fireplace, Ayanna turned to Silas and said, "I want to turn this place into more than a home. I want to turn it into a sanctuary." Silas raised an eyebrow. A sanctuary? For women. For girls. For anyone running from men like Cormac. We have money from the bank, we took blood money. Yes, but maybe we can use it to save lives. Silas nodded. Then let's do it. Let's build something worth surviving for. It was on a Sunday, during the first rain of May, that Silas proposed. He had no ring, no fancy words, just mud on his boots, sawdust on his shirt, and eyes that carried everything he never said out loud. "I'm not a man of many things," he began, standing by the apple tree they had planted for Luma. "But I've got hands that know how to build, and a heart that doesn't want to beat unless it's with you." Ayanna didn't wait for him to finish. She stepped forward, wrapped her arms around him, and said against his chest, "I've never needed a cathedral, Silas. Just this heartbeat." They married under the same tree the next morning. No priest, no guests. Just the 7 of them, no, 9 now, including the boys, and a promise whispered into soil and sky. The ranch became known as Luma's Field. People began arriving, young girls with bruised ribs and quiet eyes, boys with no names, women carrying babies and silence. They were given bread, soap, quilts, and time. time to heal, time to become new. And Silas, once a man broken by war and silence, became something else. Not a hero, not a savior, but a root, a steady thing. And Ayanna, once a ghost of loss, became light. One evening, as they watched the children chase each other beneath the sky, Ayanna leaned into him and whispered, "You know what I realized?" "What?" "That sometimes the most powerful families are the ones not born in blood but born in fire." He kissed her forehead. "Then we are a wildfire." The days bled into one another under the mellow gold of the frontier sun. No longer just a refuge, Silas's homestead had transformed into something none of them had foreseen, a sanctuary of new beginnings. Ayanna walked barefoot across the soft grass of the rebuilt yard, her shadow long behind her, arms smudged with the scent of pine and soil. The wind played with strands of her raven-black hair as she knelt to help Magnolia and Lena plant rows of wildflowers by the southern fence. They'd agreed on color blues and whites, so the children we save one day will feel like freedom blooms under their feet. Ayanna had whispered. Silas, hammer in hand, stood nearby mending a wagon wheel. But he watched her, the way her body moved with quiet strength, the way her fingers tucked a seedling into the earth like a promise. He had never believed in redemption until her silence carved room inside him for softness. The house had been rebuilt, plank by plank, with hands still scarred from battles past. The roof now held against the wind, and the windows opened to let in laughter, something that once felt foreign in his world. Each woman, once running from horrors too dark to name, had claimed a corner of the home and stitched pieces of herself into it. Patchwork blankets, feathered dream catchers, shelves carved with initials and prayers. Silas walked into the house one afternoon and found Naomi teaching Clara how to read. S-U-N, Clara struggled. Sunday, Naomi said gently, pointing at the shaft of warm light slanting across the wood floor. Just like the one you woke up under. I like sun. Clara grinned, missing one front tooth. Silas paused by the doorway, heart-catching. Months ago, these women had arrived like a thunderstorm, fierce, guarded, unpredictable. Now they were the hum of the hearth, the laughter on the porch, the steady rhythm of healing. He stepped outside and found Ayanna seated beneath the cottonwood, tuning her old violin. She hadn't played since that night of blood and snow, when the music had trembled into the dark and dared the demons to come. Now, under the dusk sky, she pressed the bow gently across the strings. A low, trembling note rang out, broken at first, then clearer, then another. A melody rose, aching, bold, alive. I didn't know you were playing again, he said softly. She looked up, her eyes like still water. I didn't know I could. He sat beside her on the bench. Neither spoke for a while. I still see him, she finally said. Cormac, in dreams. So do I, he replied. But in mine, he's not the monster anymore. He's a ghost, and ghosts can't touch us now. Ayanna leaned her head on his shoulder. Do you believe in second lives, Silas? Not in the next world, in this one. He wrapped an arm around her. I didn't, but you're proof it exists. Later that week, they all gathered under a moonlit sky as Silas stood beside the rebuilt barn. He held something small in his hand, a ring made from old silver, shaped and polished by his own fingers. It wasn't grand. It was worn and real, like them. Ayanna, he began, voice uneven. I don't have much, but I have my word, my home, and whatever life the Lord still got planned for me. And I want all of that with you. No. Gasps rose from the women. Lena cried. Magnolia smiled so wide her cheeks hurt. Ayanna stepped forward, touched the ring. Then Silas's heart. You already gave me more than a wedding ever could, she whispered. You gave me a name to say without fear. You gave me silence that listens. And you waited for me to find my music again. Silas slipped the ring on her finger, and the wind seemed to still for a breath. They married under the open sky, with no preacher, no choir, only the sound of fireflies, a violin, and the voices of 7 women who once ran from the world, now choosing to build a new one. But their story did not end with love. One evening, a rider came bearing letters, sealed documents from a marshal in New Mexico. The girls read it in silence. It detailed underground locations tied to Cormac's old trade routes. Maps, names, children unaccounted for. Ayanna folded the paper and turned to Silas. We have work to do. They sold the last of the gold from the stolen vault. But instead of hiding, they rode east. By spring, they'd purchased a broken inn on the edge of Abilene, turning it into a home for girls lost and hunted. Some came with bruises, some without names. Each one was held, fed, and given back the right to choose their own path. Silas trained the older ones in carpentry. Magnolia taught them to shoot. Naomi read them poetry by lantern light. And Ayanna, she played the violin each night until the nightmares softened and the children dreamed of flowers. The town whispered their names, not as bandits, but as legends. The 7 daughters of the dark. They were called not because they brought darkness, but because they had survived it, and in doing so, lit the way for others. Years passed. On a spring morning, Ayanna stepped into the yard, a child sleeping in a sling across her chest. Their child, half Choctaw, half frontier, all fire. She looked toward the rising sun and smiled. Silas emerged behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. What should we call her? He asked. Ayanna looked down at the baby girl, fingers curling around her necklace, a small silver moon. Hope, she whispered. And in that moment, everything that had been lost was no longer a wound, but a root. Everything that had been broken now formed the bones of something whole, not born of blood, but of choice, of survival, of love, of light. And so it was, in the final blush of twilight, when the snow no longer bit but merely kissed, when the horses nickered softly under the newly built awning of Silas's barn and smoke curled steady from the stone chimney, that life began again, not as a return to what once was, but as something newly formed. Magnolia, who once clutched a pistol tighter than any prayer, now spent mornings planting lavender in the frozen earth. She said the scent reminded her of the sister she lost and the future she had promised her. Clara had picked up the habit of sketching again, her fingers no longer trembling from old ghosts. Each line she drew on parchment carried not only grace, but healing. And Silas stoic, weather-worn Silas would sometimes wake before dawn, just to watch Ayanna breathe beside him. He no longer saw the scars on her back as remnants of a life shattered, but as threads in the tapestry of a woman reborn. They never spoke of the past unless it was in a whisper, over stew and lantern light, as if voicing the memories too loud might wake the dead. In that quiet, snowy town, no longer marked by blood or betrayal, there grew a strange, unshakable hope. They were not saints, they were survivors. And sometimes, that was more than enough.